I do wish that that you guys could have seen the first run I had at today's episode where I realized that my wife moved my lamp, my lights around here because she was working at my desk and couldn't see anything. And it was just like this solar flare on my already very, very reflective forehead. I fixed it a little bit. It's not quite all the way right. It seems like everything is lower. This is all out of whack. Nothing's good. This is all wrong. But we're going to forge ahead. Welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Today, we are looking back at injuries to start this season. You guys might remember, this was a show we did on opening night, exploring the injuries, or at least the big ones, in the NBA, the ones that would have some kind of impact on the fantasy landscape, and then what we would do about it. So let's look back and see what it was. We're using... we also looked at who benefited from them. I forgot about that part. So the first one on the board, and we worked our way down via Yahoo's pre-rank list, was Joel Embiid. He was listed as out. The expected return date was around 1 week, which, by the way, sounds crazy, but actually wasn't that far off. He missed a few games, and then he played, and then he missed a few games, and he played, and he missed a few games, and finally it was like, that's the end of the road. The 12-team pickup was Andre Drummond, who didn't really excel in his opportunity with Embiid out. We know how this whole thing went. Andre missed a bunch of time himself. Adem Bona ended up being the guy later in the year. Gershon Yabusele had brief stretches where he was somewhat fantasy relevant. But again, this was another scenario where we knew a player was out at the start of the year. And you guys might remember, I have a number of tenets on the fantasy side. Not to be confused with tenants. For some reason, I've heard people pronounce the word tenant. Tenant. There's no second N, just tenant. A tenet, of course, is like a principal belief. The main rule, whatever you want to call it, to be here to... If you're going to listen to my show over however many days, weeks, years, whatever, you need to know these few tenets. And one of the big ones is don't draft players who are injured on opening night. Now, obviously, some of this was easier said than done because it didn't sound like Embiid was going to be out, and so there were these opportunities to maybe grab him at a discount, especially in the head-to-head side. You got to get off to a quick start. So one thing to keep in mind through all of these names is that generally I avoided these players. Generally, with some exception. As you guys have already heard, I did draft Embiid in one rather cheap Roto League, and obviously it didn't work out, but I thought, all right, coin flip that this is either a win or a loss. So what do we take away from this? Well, the expected return dates, we should never believe what we hear on that front anymore. NBA teams are incredibly clandestine. They won't give accurate injury info anymore. And so, this Embiid thing, like, we think he's going to be out around a week or whatever. And some of this was guessing based on tea leaf stuff. Most of these guys took longer than the expected return date. Not all of them, but many. The way I have this light set up right now, and I'm not starting over this time, it's reflecting off of my glasses today too. I'm going to text my wife as soon as today's show's over to yell at her for moving my thing. I had it just right. It was just right, and I don't remember how it was. That part's on me. Before we get to the next name on the list, although I will show the YouTubers the name on the list, this show is brought to you by Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for sports betting action. Also featuring the Bet Online Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, a live casino where you can play with other actual real beings, over 20 different types of blackjack, live or otherwise. If you know some of these games, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of games that casinos have that I don't know how to play. But I think you can play War, if I'm remembering right. I think they got a War game there, which is very Vegas vacation. Plus, of course, if you want to wait around until sports kick in, great. That's the spot to be. Baseball's in full swing. Got games. Baseball, you got day games sometimes, too, so that's kind of fun. NBA playoffs are wrapping up. They final start tomorrow. NHL playoffs, I don't actually know how far along those are. I'll admit, I don't keep up with the NHL playoffs. But you got WNBA going around. You got UFC. You got golf. There's all kinds of stuff that you can get down on over at Bet Online because Bet Online, the game starts here. Paul George is the next name on the list. He had a pre-rank of 31. His expected return date was 1 to 2 weeks at the front end of the season. Kelly Oubre Jr. was the pickup for 12 teamers. This one obviously turned out to be a much larger deal also, although I think PG came back and it was another one where he was like here and then there and then here and then there. And then finally was like, nope, we got to take a break from our podcast. That was the Paul George logic. And then that didn't really do anything for the situation. So then he was go back to the podcast, but take a break from basketball. He played 41 games this year, a year after playing 74 for the Clippers, a very healthy 2023-24 season. That's the contract year bump. You see that sometimes, not every time, but it certainly worked for PG. But that was the only year really in the last half decade that Paul George had been actually healthy. His entire time with the Clippers was marred by missed ball games. He missed 24 games, 18 games, 51 games, 26 games, then just 8. And then he missed 41 this year. So again, looking forward, I don't know how you would ever expect Paul George to be fully healthy again. But even this year, this was another situation. We just talked about him looking over some of our old rankings and that Paul George had that health denomination, and I had him down as someone I wasn't really looking at until closer to 40. And even that would have been a terrible spot because nothing went right for PG this year. He never really got his legs underneath him. He didn't do as much because you had Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Someone always takes a hit when you bring three dudes together. And then the injury stuff was obviously just sort of like the icing on the crap cake at that point. But again, this is another one where when you know a guy's hurt coming into the season, it really behooves you to avoid that player because things often go wrong. Not every time, however, because the next name on the list is Jaren Jackson Jr., who was expected to miss the first couple of weeks of the season. His pre-rank was 36. There wasn't really a 12-team replacement, at least not that we thought. The head-to-head stream I have listed here on this October 22nd show was Santi Aldama. He ended up being pretty good for like the first half of the season. Even for a while after JJJ was back, Aldama was playing well. But then he got hurt. And so Santi's season kind of fell apart a little bit. But we weren't expecting that much. It was just supposed to be a couple weeks stream at the front end. So that was all right. This is one where, again, I ended up with 0 Jaren Jackson Jr.'s on any of my fantasy teams, but his season ended up going relatively well by all accounts. And again, that's because this rule is never going to be 100%. And actually, that's kind of an important point to make. Nothing in life is 100%. Nothing. With fantasy, as with, sports betting in general, or really just almost anything you do, your goal should be to generally, not all the time, but generally, you play the direction that gives you the better odds. But even when the odds are 75-25, if you do it 4 times, odds are it's not going to work one of those 4 times. And again, that's, it doesn't, sort of small sample size stuff. But like if you did it 4,000 times, it's going to come up on the wrong side about 25% of the time, about 1,000 of the 4,000, give or take. That's what the confidence interval is. That's what a bell curve is about. So in this instance, if you generally avoid guys that are hurt to start the year, usually that will work out relatively well for you. In this particular case, avoiding JJJ was not necessary. He ended up playing in 74 out of 82 games this year. He was decidedly fine. His final rank, I think, was 36, which is right on his pre-rank. And by all accounts, he had a decent season. Not outstanding, but, good enough. Blocks were down from that crazy 3-block season he had 3 years back, basically. But since he's learned how to stop fouling a bit and stay on the floor, the blocks have indeed kind of come down. And that's 2 seasons in a row where they've been lower, despite the minutes, opportunity, and all that stuff, all the other things, being higher. The good news for JJJ, not only did he stay healthy this year, but he shot 49% from the field, despite really keeping the same general volume of three-pointers. He made more of his threes. That was helpful. He also made more of his twos. That was helpful. You got sort of like the good offensive JJJ this year, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he had more competent offensive players around him this season. Ja Morant was not super healthy, but he was there for a decent chunk of the season. Desmond Bane was there for most of the season, and that took a little bit of the pressure off of JJJ, where last year he was just out there chucking away 17 and a half damn shots a game, and the field goal percent went down. So JJJ worked out fine. Again, we avoided him because he was injured to start the year, but that one would have been okay. But it's not like you missed out on a massive win. It was, if anything, break even for Roto and a small win in head-to-head because of the durability. Getting 74 games out of him is a victory. Getting 74 games out of anybody is a victory. Next name on the list is Kawhi Leonard, who you guys know I have a serious soft spot for. And so even if I'm telling you guys to avoid him, I always end up drafting him somewhere. But never in head-to-head. Be clear on that. Kawhi Leonard is not a guy you drafted head-to-head. Even though he ended up being a pretty good end-of-season head-to-head guy. To get to that point, squatting on him for a couple of months and then getting, half-cocked Kawhi for a couple of months after that before you finally got full-bore Kawhi for the last, 4 to 6 weeks of the season, that's just too much of a price to pay on the head-to-head side. Roto, you can make an okay case for someone like Kawhi because and the difference, by the way, in sort of why do I have a soft spot for Leonard, Kawhi, you ask, is because his pre-rank was 48 and he was going later than that. So it was sort of like a double dip here. I think his ADP at the end of it all ended up being in the 50s. I think I saw him go in the 60s in a couple of spots near the end of draft season. So yeah, I'm taking him in the 5th round because he's a first rounder when he's playing. Joel Embiid is a top of the first rounder when he's playing, but in that same kind of like, okay, let's just look at what a player's Basketball Monster does a nice job of showing what kind of a player value might be. Joel Embiid, let's say he was going to be like the number 3 guy in fantasy if he actually had a healthy season, and you could get him at 12. This year was a little different because there was a very clear top 3, but is that the same or different than Kawhi, who's like a top 6 guy when he's healthy, and you can get him at 60? The value on Kawhi is similar from a like how important, like, because the gap between player 10 and player 60 is almost the same, believe it or not, as the difference between player 2 and player 12. I know it seems crazy, but that's the way the math works out. The difference, even though the gap in what they're worth is similar, is what you have to spend to get them. You're spending a 5th rounder, which your team can survive without, as opposed to a first rounder on Embiid that your team can't really survive without. So yeah, I always end up with Kawhi, even though it's kind of stupid. I know that. I'm fully aware. I just keep enabling myself with these good stretches he goes through. Do I regret it? Not really. I mean, he ended up being exactly what I wanted him to be on the Roto side. It just took him a little longer to get there. The 12-team ad was Norman Powell. A couple of head-to-head streamers I had listed were like Derek Jones Jr., Terrence Mann, Kevin Porter Jr. These guys, they were possible streams. None of them ended up amounting to much. Derek Jones being the closest of those 3. But Norman Powell was the obvious 12-team ad. And actually, he ended up being a guy that we should have drafted. And I did in a few spots, as I think he was one of the late flyers. We did a Flyers show because he was great for the 2 months that Kawhi was out. And then took a little bit of a nosedive, as you'd expect. Moving along, next player on the list was Isaiah Hartenstein, who was pre-ranked 70th and was expected to be out about a month. This was one that didn't make a ton of sense to me because with the long injury timeline, his pre-rank should have dropped like a boulder, and it just sort of didn't. They dropped him to 90 like on opening night, but it was way too late for that to have the impact it needed to. His ADP finished at about 80 which again, that includes all the leagues that drafted after the season started. So his ADP was still in the 70s when the season began, basically. And that was crazy because, like, even if he was 100% healthy after coming back, you're already wiping out 15 games. That means your best case scenario is that he basically plays slightly less than the league average number of games, which, by the way, not what happened. He missed another 10 games basically over the course of the season. I think he missed more than 15 at the front end also, and he ended up playing only 57 out of 82 games. Yes, I did end up with Hartenstein in a couple of spots. They were games cap roto leagues where he fell outside the top 100. That was, again, a little bit different because you're talking about a guy that had, I thought, sort of top 75 range potential with the team fully healthy. He was more like a top 50, top 40 guy when Chet was out. And they eased all these guys in, too. And Hartenstein finished... What was Hartenstein's final rank this year? Nope, that's not right. That's not telling the whole story. No, 76. All right, so he did finish in the 70s. And he did pretty much what we thought he would do. 28 minutes was around what we expected. He's a little bit more involved offensively than with New York. Not by much. I think what the hope was that there'd be a little bit more there. The assists were solid. Steals and blocks were okay, but not great. Maybe could have expected a little bit more out of those, but perhaps we were asking for too much. I mean, last year in New York, he was at 1.2 steals in 25 minutes. He was lower than that in 3 extra minutes per game. So that was kind of where did things fall off a little bit. So if you got the bigger defensive stats, that's what would have pushed him up into that kind of 50, 60 range instead of 75. But regardless, like, I don't regret taking him when he fell outside the top 100 because you spend a 9th, 10th round pick on a guy that can roll top 75 or better. You typically do it on a games cap format. In head-to-head, you probably don't because you're not guaranteed anything even once he comes back. So this is another one where, by and large, if you dodged the injured guy to start the year, it worked out better for you than if you took the chance. Devin Vassell was the next one. He was pre-ranked 74th. The expected return was pretty nebulous when we did the show back in October. I listed it as at least 1 week, likely more, and it was. There was no 12-team ad. There were some streams. I was guessing on Keldon Johnson. It ended up being more Julian Champagnie, but none of them was that great while Vassell was out. After coming back, Devin was pretty much what you thought he would be, which was number, believe it or not, 77. So he's right on that pre-rank, but no discount for the injury. He was fairly healthy after he came back. Missed a couple of weeks spread out across the season. Played in 64 out of 82 games, which again is slightly below league average. So again, if the hope was that you could get a guy who would be like a top 50 player once he was back, I kind of get why you take the shot. And I also get that in the 7th round, you can get away with beginning to do some of the risky stuff. But at the same time, if you look at the guys that were getting drafted around Devin Vassell, there were some pretty good options still on the board. What was his final ADP? I think it was earlier than that. Where are you, Devin? I can't find you. There he is. His final ADP was at 86, but I think it's because his final pre-rank was 77. I don't really understand that one. I might have to bounce around a little bit and try to figure out why. Why was that? Let's go to the pre-ranks and see if we can figure out why Vassell. Yeah, I don't know. His pre-rank was always in the 60s, 70s, mid-70s. Yeah, it must have been some early season drafts that pushed him down the board a little bit. So again, could you get him after 100? Generally, no. If you could, much like with Hartenstein, I probably would. But again, if you're looking at guys that were going in the mid-70s, you had these other options that were not hurt to start the year. OG Anunoby, Brook Lopez, Tyler Hero, Walker Kessler, Ivica Zubac, Jordan Poole, Kobe White. all these guys healthy. Austin Reeves down in the late 80s to start the year, and many of them had the opportunity to overperform. I wasn't that high on a couple of those dudes that I just listed, but all those guys were pretty damn good this year, and you didn't have to sit on them. So again, that's another point for dodge the injured guy. Trey Murphy III. This one would have been a big loss. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. He was pre-ranked 82. Once he came back, he was amazing. He was number 25 for the 53 games that he lasted this year, and then he tore his labrum and missed the rest of the season. I think it's actually possible that did Trey Murphy hit his mark even with all the injuries? Let's check the totals rank on Trey. Yeah, 71. So he still actually landed despite missing almost 30 games. He was a tough one to take the plunge on, too, because he was week to week coming into the year, meaning we didn't really know when he was coming back. What was Trey Murphy's final ADP? I swear to the good you-know-what, I can't figure out where any of these guys ended up. He was relatively late, wasn't he? Trey, where are you, Trey? No, he's not in that chunk. Was he later? There he is. Final ADP of 97. So, this one became a little bit more borderline. Good friend of the show, Rhett Bauer, is a massive Trey Murphy fan and was very right on this. I don't think we can take credit for dodging Trey Murphy due to injury because he got injured a second time. Because he would have blown this number out of the water. He basically was doing what we want Kawhi to do, where you get a guy so far behind his per game number that even if they miss 20 games, they still beat that mark by totals. So Trey Murphy would have been a win. Honestly, there isn't really a win so far on this list. JJJ is the closest one to a win because he actually stayed healthy the entire year. I think every other name we've covered, they've missed more than league average number of games. And then Murphy somehow was a win despite missing almost 30 basketball games. That's how good he was. He's going to go earlier next year. So this sort of was the chance. And then he blew it with the injury that knocked him out for the last, whatever it was, month and a half of the season. But again, once you get into these don't draft injured guys things, that rule kind of comes off the table when their ADP gets outside the top 100 a little bit. Because hopefully at that point you have 6, 7, 8 very reliable dudes that you can build on. Mark Williams, kind of in the same boat as Trey Murphy. He came into the season week to week. There was no stream. There was no real backup for Trey Murphy. The backup for Mark Williams there was no 12-team ad. Nick Richards was a head-to-head streamer, meaning when the schedule was good, because Nick Richards is not a very good fantasy player. No matter how many times you guys yell at me about it, he's not going to turn into a good fantasy player. Mark Williams had a pre-rank of 86. He's another guy where the actual ADP was farther down the board. His ADP was 102. So like Trey Murphy, who was going in the 90s, Mark Williams is going in the hundreds. So this is one where, so here's the thing, you see an ADP of 102, that doesn't mean he's going to get drafted at 102 in every league you're in. It means that's the average. A couple of times he's going to go in the 90s. Sometimes he's going to go 110, 115. And that's where I ended up with him in one Roto league when he fell outside the top 110, I think it was. And I was like, all right, fine. I don't know how long he's going to be out. But this guy's a Goliath from a fantasy standpoint when healthy. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. He just missed, almost half the season. Mark Williams, like Kawhi Leonard, Mark played 44 games. Kawhi played exactly 44. Right? Were they the same number? No. Did Kawhi play? Kawhi had a playoff series. I think he was lower than 44 during the actual regular season. Is the playoff game getting included there? Was he at 38 or 39? Yeah, 37. So Mark Williams actually played more games than Kawhi this year, and per game wise was amazing. But again, I don't know how you do it even in the head-to-head side. How do you start your year with someone so hurt? The way you can do it, I've already said. But I'll say it again. If it's your 9th, 10th, I mean, you could get Mark Williams in the 10th round. If you got 8, 9 guys on your team that are not risks, then you could do it. You put one guy on your IL. You get off to an okay start anyway because you immediately pick up somebody to replace it. The problem is that many of us play in leagues that don't have 3 IL slots. Yahoo Public Leagues, you got 3 IL slots. You can use a 9th, 10th round pick on an injured dude because odds are you're probably not going to have 3 guys on the IL the first week, 2 of the season. You will probably at some point, but generally it's not the first week unless you drafted 3 injured guys, which, by the way, I did do in a Roto League, and it was dumb. It was stupid. It's too many. But, head-to-head, Roto, whatever, you could draft 1 injured guy if you have 3 IL slots. Just make sure it's late enough that it's not going to set your team too far back. And by the way, the league where I drafted Mark Williams, it did set me back. That was a team where I really badly needed big man stats, and he just kept not coming back and not coming back. And so, it, from like a game planning standpoint, it hurt. Chris Middleton, pre-rank of 102. His expected return was a couple of weeks. The head-to-head stream was Gary Trent Jr., which, I mean, meh. You guys know I will never trust Chris Middleton again, so this one very much should have been avoided because every time with him, it's 1 to 2 weeks that turns into 5 or 6. They kid gloved him the entire season, and then they shipped him out for Kyle Kuzma, which is the ultimate in dignity. And yeah, I'm not saying anything else on Middleton. I'm just never going to draft him again. Because every year he starts the season hurt, and it's all fluff that he's coming back. Here's one that actually kind of worked, was Kristaps Porzingis, not because he was super healthy or anything, because he wasn't, and, he didn't have his world's best productive season. In fact, I think he had one of his worst seasons productivity-wise in a really long time, but he did come back sooner than expected, so that's something. He wasn't bad. Porzingis was at, 19 and 7 with 1.5 blocks on decent percentages, and he hit 2.5 3-pointers a game. But by totals, he was number 115. So this is, again, where you were kind of like looking like if you drafted him outside the top 100, he was pre-ranked outside the top 100, you were probably pretty pleased that he came back 1 month into the year instead of 2. Because when he initially had his procedure, they said they thought he'd be back around Christmas. And he was back well before that, 3-4 weeks, I think, before Christmas. So, yeah, it upended our strategy a little bit. I liked Al Horford late in drafts, and we only got, 4 or 5 weeks of good Al Horford instead of I thought we'd get more like 8. Porzingis missed a lot of basketball again, as he always does. And certainly when you miss the first month of the season on top of it, it's going to be even harder. But it's basically what he was last year minus a month. Instead of 57 games, he played in 42. So this was very much a Roto games cap kind of pray he comes back and does the really good Porzingis thing. I wouldn't have dinged you if you got him at 110 in a games cap league. I think that would have been totally fine. But head to head, hell nah. And RJ Barrett. I don't even know why I put him on the list because everybody was asking about him. But you guys know I don't like RJ Barrett's fantasy game. He was pre-ranked 119th. His expected return was we didn't really know. The 12-team stream was Grady Dick, who, by the way, was actually kind of decent when Barrett was out, and then quickly was also out at the beginning of the year. So Grady had a lot of wiggle room. I didn't want to say Dick had a lot of wiggle room because, well, you see where that went. But Barrett's just not a good 9-cat fantasy player. That's just the way it is at this point. He's rarely inside the top 150 unless you're punting all of the points league categories, or the non-points league categories, I should say. And then fine, like whatever. But he was injured to start the year anyway. So let's just for a moment assume you actually were in a points league. And so me saying this guy's a bad 9-cat guy, you guys are just ignoring that. How many games did Barrett end up playing this season? A scant 58. So all told, do I have a recap slide on this one? No, I don't have a recap slide. What a pain in the butt, Dan. Program a recap slide, you idiot. I didn't. The recap is Embiid, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Isaiah Hartenstein, Devin Vassell, Trey Murphy, Mark Williams, Chris Middleton, Kristaps Porzingis, and RJ Barrett all played a lower number of games than the average relevant fantasy player. Every single one of them. Only Jaren Jackson played more games than the average fantasy player. Only JJJ. So by totals, Jaren Jackson was a win. Per game, he was right where he was getting drafted. So I guess to that end, it makes him a pretty good draft pick. But like, how many names was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We did 11 names, and 1 out of the 11 actually had a mostly healthy season. 1. Like, think of the rest of these guys. Devin Vassell was probably the second closest. Trey Murphy had a nice chunk in the middle of the year where he was amazing. And then, other injury. So, like, Trey Murphy gets an honorable mention because it wasn't the thing at the beginning of the year that blew up his season. It was a different thing that you couldn't really see coming. And then Devin Vassell gets the, you almost made it, bud, nod. But the rest of these guys were, 20 games, 30 games, 40 games. Some of them managed to get into the 50s. It's rough. Less than 10% of the names that were injured for more than day-to-day to start the year actually had a good fantasy season. It's why it's a tenet, meaning it's not 100%, but this year it was 91% of the time. If you skipped over the guy that was hurt to start the year, it was probably better for your fantasy team. I'm Dan Vespers. Like, rate, and subscribe on the way out. Back tomorrow, we'll look at some more buckets, I think. I don't know. Something else might come up. Who knows? It's the off season. I do whatever the hell I want. See you in 24 hours.